It's been quite commonly known in recent years, for instance, that girls of Pakistani origin have, at the age of 16, been taken out of British schools and married to older men. Now, if a white girl of 16 over recent decades had been married against her will to some randy old pervert who wanted to have his way with her, the state would sort of stepped in. It would have rightly said that that was an outrage. But, lo and behold, 16-year-old girls of Asian origin disappearing from their schools, nobody wanted to mention it because it could be thought to be racist. The idea was that there are different values for different people in society, and there is nothing more divisive than that, and I'm glad that David Cameron has called time on it.
As Douglas Murray's relentless pursuit of truth persists, he fearlessly ventures into the depths of societal discord. This time on BBC's Question Time, locking horns with Mehdi Hasan. His latest venture delves into the troubling clash of ideologies between Western liberalism and Islamic extremism, shedding light on the underlying tensions and complexities. With unwavering dedication, Murray's insightful analyses navigate the turbulent waters of democracy, extremism, and individual responsibility in a world on the brink of chaos and enlightenment.
Do you agree with David Cameron that multiculturalism in the UK has failed?
This is the speech that David Cameron made this week, where he talked about the doctrine of state multiculturalism, that had encouraged different cultures to live separate lives. We've failed to provide a vision of society to which they feel they want to belong. And we've even tolerated segregated communities behaving in ways that run completely counter to our values. Douglas Murray.
Yes, I think he was right. And I think we should start this by just reminding ourselves what multiculturalism is not. Multiculturalism is not multiracialism. It isn't pluralism. For years, the multicultural policy has been able to glide along, in part because of that misunderstanding. Because of the misunderstanding that when you talk about multiculturalism as a policy, what you're talking about is solely immigration, or multiracialism, or so on. It's allowed itself an incredible easy ride, not least by the fact that this confusion has meant that any critic of multiculturalism has been immediately decried for years now as a racist.
What do you understand by multiculturalism?
Multiculturalism as a policy, as a policy, multiculturalism is the following. It is the idea that there is effectively no such thing as British society or British culture. There are simply different communities which you're born into. If, for instance, you're born into a community from an Asian background, you will be treated by government throughout your life as a member of the Asian community. If you're born into some other racial or religious grouping, you'll be regarded in that way. And that anything in that group could be different from what the norm in society goes on. Let me give one quick example I gave in an article yesterday in the Wall Street Journal. It's been quite commonly known in recent years, for instance, that girls of Pakistani origin have, at the age of 16, been taken out of British schools and married to older men. Now, if a white girl of 16 over recent decades had been married against her will to some randy old pervert who wanted to have his way with her, the state would sort of stepped in. It would have rightly said that that was an outrage. But, lo and behold, 16-year-old girls of Asian origin disappearing from their schools, nobody wanted to mention it because it could be thought to be racist. The idea was that there are different values for different people in society, and there is nothing more divisive than that, and I'm glad that David Cameron has called time on it.
Douglas Murray hits the mark when denouncing the disarray brought by misguided multicultural policies. Multiculturalism doesn't equate to racial diversity, but encourages divisive cultural enclaves. Recall the hidden horrors, like forced marriages ignored due to misplaced tolerance. Murray's clarity echoes as he dismantles the falsehoods masking this societal rift. Can we afford to uphold a policy that fractures rather than unites?
Mehdi Hasan, different values for different people in society.
Well,
and it's time to
in answer to the question, I think he's wrong. I don't agree with Douglas's definition at all. I believe I'm a product of multiculturalism, not just multiracialism. My father came to this country in 1966. He used to write lots of letters to newspapers with his views on the stories of the day, and he used to get dog litter through his letterbox in response. That 45 years later, in my view, 45 years later, his son can sit here on Question Time with David Dimbleby and a Conservative minister and say that I'm a proud Briton and a proud Asian and a proud Muslim. I think is a testimony to the success of multiculturalism in this country, which is often not far too easy. And on Douglas's point, On Douglas's point about anyone who goes against multiculturalism is regarded as a racist, A, that's not true, but B, let's look at the reaction to David Cameron's speech. Nick Griffin said it was a provocative speech. When Nick Griffin says your speech is provocative, you know you're in trouble. The daughter of the leader of the French National Front, Jean-Marie Le Pen, said she wanted to congratulate David Cameron on his speech, and the leader of the EDL in Luton said he's saying what we're saying, he knows what his base is saying. So when I hear reactions like that, I do worry about such speech.
Well, what do you think he was getting at? What was he trying to say? Do you think he was speaking in a way that he intended to appeal?
I think he did. And it's sad because, look, I'm quite critical of David Cameron, but in 2007 he wrote an article in The Observer in which he said we can't bully people into Britishness, we have to inspire them, integration is a two-way street, it's not just about immigrant communities, it's about all of us. And that David Cameron disappeared. 4 years later, he turns up in Munich, of all places, to tell us that we need this muscular liberalism and to talk like Douglas about forced marriages. Sorry, how many people have forced marriages in this country? And show me which cultural group defends forced marriages and which government defends forced marriages. I've yet to come across a single one.
Mehdi Hasan champions a flawed vision of the success of multiculturalism. The persistence of separate cultural identities under the guise of unity is concerning. Holding false praises of an ideology that fosters division is misguided. Swallowing up reality by equating criticism with racism is a fallacy. Multiculturalism's failures lay bare in the shadow of misplaced applause from divisive figures.
Douglas Murray, do you want to come back on what Mehdi Hasan said?
Well, look, I mean, both of the sort of left-wing people on the panel tonight, Mehdi and Jackie Smith, if you can still call Labour members left-wing, but both of them have done the same thing the left always does on this. You try to have a discussion about the failure of multiculturalism, and you have the BNP thrown in by Mehdi. Told, well, the BNP member congratulated him, at least concede, Mehdi, all sorts of crazy and horrible and disgusting people can jump on a bandwagon without meaning that it's the wrong thing to have said. Maybe they're just opportunists. I suspect they are. And Jackie then throws in the example of the EDL. I think, do you really think, Jackie, that was what David Cameron was aiming to do? I mean, a couple of, 100 people marching in Luton does not mean the Prime Minister of Britain should not be making a speech about a very serious matter. And this is the problem. The debate by the left is always attempted to be shut down by associating it with far-right extremists and racist groups instead of having a frank and honest discussion.
I did not say that he shouldn't make the speech, and I said I thought the argument he made in the speech was right, and incidentally, it was the one that we had previously made. What I said was it would have been appropriate, given that speech, to also say that when we're promoting shared British values against Islamist extremism, we should also do it against right-wing extremism.
I think you can belittle the idea of a couple of hundred extremists, but if you put yourself in the shoes of a British Muslim in Luton or in other cities where the EDL have marched who live in fear of those groups, then I think they have a right for their Prime Minister not to go abroad to Germany and send them lectures from there on who isn't and isn't an extremist.
Douglas Murray eloquently dissected the fallacy of the left's reflexive association of multiculturalism critique with far-right groups. He is absolutely correct. The left's incessant demonization stifles meaningful discourse. Sam and Jackie's maneuver to link David Cameron's speech to the EDL lacked substance. Would legitimizing such flawed logic foster unity amid extremism, or merely perpetuate ideological suppression?
The root cause of terrorism is bad teaching in religious schools, and that has to be addressed fundamentally.
It's rubbish.
You're saying rubbish?
Rubbish. I mean, very briefly, we didn't get into this, but one of my other objections to David Cameron's speech is the idea, you want to give a speech on multiculturalism, give a speech on multiculturalism. You want to give a speech on counter-terrorism, give a speech on counter-terrorism. Don't pretend they're one and the same thing. Don't offend our intelligence. Terrorism is not a cultural problem. Terrorism is a political problem.
No, and it's a religious problem as well. And it's a religious problem.
In your view, Douglas.
No, in the view of a lot of people, including the people who carry out acts of terror, who say they do it in the name of religion.
They also say they do it because of foreign policy, and you always ignore that bit, don't you, Douglas?
No, I don't.
When they say they do it because of Iraq, you don't notice that bit.
At least listen to the reason they say they do it.
Agreed. So why didn't he talk about foreign policy in his speech on Saturday?
I'm willing to talk about foreign policy, as would David Cameron be. But you cannot keep on pretending that there is no religious component to the terrorism, because there is.
I thought you said it was cultural.
No, just...
Cultural religion is not the same.
Stick with religion. You're saying there is no religious component.
I'm saying there is a religious component. I'm saying it's not a cultural component. The people who blew themselves up on the London Underground were not people who couldn't speak English or didn't go to secular schools.
That's the tragedy of it.
Well, then don't say it's a cultural problem.
No, but you're
don't pretend that forced marriage.
Because maybe you're doing what you're doing.
Mehdi Hasan's claim that terrorism is caused by culture and not religion is flawed, as highlighted by Douglas. Taking the example of Islamic extremists, their motives have always been rooted in religion, not their cultural upbringing.
Could the introduction of democracy to Egypt have the effect of destabilizing the Middle East and lead to a string of anti-Western extremist Arab states in the region?
Mehdi Hasan, what do you make of it?
I welcome what they're doing in Egypt, and I'm delighted to see, after Tunisia, in Egypt, people taking to the streets and calling for democracy. For far too long, especially here in the West, we've looked at the Arab world and rather patronisingly said, oh, they can't deal with democracy, or they're too backward or barbaric, or there's religious reasons that mean that they can't do democracy. And actually they're showing that they can do democracy if we get out of the way.
The President hasn't stood down.
Well, of course, the President is our man, let's not forget. The President is not their man, the President is our man. For 30 years, President Mubarak's been propped up by the US and its allies, $1.3 billion of American aid every year. So if we're going to talk about why he's still there, he's there because he is one of a number of regional strongmen and dictators and tyrants and despots who is there to basically protect our regional petrol station from which we get our cheap oil. And unfortunately, that has meant that people in the Arab world have not had the democracy and the democratic rights that they so deserve. So I welcome these peaceful revolutions which are getting rid of these dictators. And if I was a prince in Saudi Arabia tonight, I hope I wouldn't be getting any sleep.
Douglas Murray.
The first thing is that to get back to the question, I mean, the issue of democracy across the region. Some of us have been arguing for many years that Arab states, Muslim majority countries, have the same desire for democracy as the rest of the world. You used to hear people say about the Eastern Bloc, the Eastern Europeans can't cope with democracy. Lo and behold, they could. You used to hear it said about South America, the same thing. South Americans somehow can't cope with democracy. Lo and behold, they could. And the same thing is becoming clear across the Arab and Muslim world. The Lebanese Druze leader, Walid Jumblat, said that the sight in 2005 of Iraqis going to the polls for the first time would have in time a seismic effect in the region, because people would not see their neighbours going to vote and not want that themselves. Now this is coming sometime after most of us expected it, but there are obviously problems, and it's naive to walk into this and ignore some of the problems within Egypt.
Do you see Mubarak, as Mehdi Hasan said, as our person, the West's person in Egypt?
No,
or do you think that we should have...
I think it's equally patronising to the people of Egypt to assume they have had no role in their own country. However, the West has had a very complex and, I think, unfortunate, regrettable situation in recent years of thinking that stability and the pursuit of stability in the region was the most important thing. That has come back to bite us again and again, not least in the rise in anti-Western feeling across the region. There is a problem, though, and it has to be flagged up, to go back to the question, which is the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood, if it didn't have Muslim in the name, would be being described at the moment as a fascist political party. It has its fascism. It is an extremist organisation. Its offshoot, the Hamas in the Gaza, when it got into power, immediately killed its opposition, and it hasn't had another election. It was just another one announced, July the 9th this year. There was meant to be another election in the Palestinian areas. The Hamas have said no. They are a one-vote, once political party, and we can't be so naive to think we can't. No. They cannot be so naive as to think that the Brotherhood, if they came to power in Egypt, would be anything other than a disaster for the region.
Well, the state is... Douglas is absolutely right. Arab and Muslim nations deserve democracy. The West's blind support for stability fueled anti-Western sentiments. The Muslim Brotherhood, an extremist group by any name, embodies fascism. Their violent rise to power in Gaza reveals their true nature. Should we ignore this menace? Isn't it naivety to assume their rule wouldn't spell disaster? Whose responsibility is it to prevent such catastrophes?
No. Let me clarify this. So the following. It is very unwise for leaders like William Hague, David Cameron and Barack Obama to be saying who they would like to run Egypt. It's a choice for the Egyptian people, and they should remain silent. But that does not mean that behind the scenes and elsewhere you cannot say that the government, whatever it is that comes in Egypt, has to abide by, among other things, international norms, peace treaties, including the Treaty of Peace that has kept peace between Egypt and Israel for 3 decades now. And this is a very, very important thing, because if the Brotherhood comes in and says, as their leaders have said in recent days, that they will immediately block the Suez Canal and start a war with Israel, then we are collectively going to be, and the Middle East is going to be in serious trouble.
How can you order a new government to abide by a treaty made by Mubarak?
Well, in the following way,
between Egypt and Israel. When you say you don't want intervention,
in the following way, by saying that by using soft power, by encouraging the country to go in a certain way, by making it clear that for Egypt to become a normalised country, it has to have a normal government.
Douglas rightly pointed out the reckless interventions of foreign leaders in Egypt's affairs. It's vital for Egyptians to choose their path independently. However, should we ignore the potential chaos if extremist elements like the Brotherhood jeopardize peace treaties? Can soft power influence a normalized government in Egypt? Who holds the key to safeguarding regional stability amidst looming threats?
In the check shirt, the blue check shirt. It's somebody with a striped shirt, doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think the big difference between Eastern Europe and the Middle East is Islam. And some would say that Islam is not compatible with democracy.
Okay.
And tell that to the Indonesians.
Yeah,
Indonesia is the largest Muslim country in the world and is a democracy.
I find what Douglas Murray is saying objectionable. He's saying in public, oh, the leaders, we mustn't say who should be in power in Egypt, but actually you're advocating behind-the-scenes action and covert action to influence it. And you also seem to me to be saying that the will of the Egyptian people, should they democratically elect the Muslim Brotherhood, who I notice you refer to as the Brotherhood, because it makes them sound more mysterious and dangerous, that actually we should start interfering then and telling Egyptians how they should vote and how their government should behave.
I hope I made it clear that I think that it would be regrettable for the Egyptian people, for the region and the international community, if an extremist organisation like the Brotherhood took control of Egypt, did what it did in the Gaza, murdered the opposition and never had another election. I hope you would join me in regretting that as well.
I'm a psychotherapist and I work for a voluntary organisation which is being highly threatened under the cuts that your government have brought in. You mentioned earlier that you were worried and concerned about people with mental health problems. Where and how are they going to be helped?
Well, just specifically on that point, it's just worth making the point that the National Health Service budget is actually being protected. Labour did not commit to protect it. Labour would have cut the budget to the National Health Service. For us, it's the priority, and we're protecting the budget.
The panel tackles with questions from the audience. Mehdi is seen defending Islamic countries from critique, while Douglas is left to handle those from the audience who seek to twist his words, making it clear that he's not in support of an organisation like the Brotherhood, due to their brutal political tactics. And the second woman is tackled by the host himself.
Douglas Murray.
I have to say, well, it's nice to see the people of Bristol have such fire in their belly for this question. But I have to say, I wouldn't like to see the household accounts of some of you who booed Francis Moore just now. I mean, it's not, as it were, debatable whether or not this country has run out of money. It's not, as it were, debatable whether or not the previous government maxed out all the credit cards. It's simply the fact.
It is.
And if you just look at the situation that this country is in economically, you'd realise that. There's no reason, as far as I understand it, neither the Liberal Democrats nor the Conservative Party are committed simply to punishing the people of this country, or just love taking away health provisions, or for people with psychiatric problems. The fact is that cuts are necessary, and they have to become somewhere. Now, quickly, the big society is, I mean, it is a very vague concept to some of us. I'm not sure what it is myself. I don't know if David Cameron's sure, but as I understand it, it's something like the flip side of the small state, which people of my conservative persuasion are very keen on, which is that people shouldn't expect the state to provide them with everything. We've created a very strange and I think rather unpleasant thing in our society, which is that if anyone expects anything, they expect it from the state. It's led to a sort of moral obesity in this country. I was speaking to a politician recently
who said...
Bring
your remarks to a close, because we're coming to the end of the programme. Mehdi Hasan.
On the big society, I'm with Ming. I don't know what it means. I think the short form is BS. On specifically
BSE,
on the specific issue of the big society itself and whether it's going to be damaged. I mean, you talk about true and facts. It's undeniable that if you take £4.5 billion away from voluntary groups, the big society is going to be damaged. Let me mention to you very briefly a man named John Coventry, who works in St Austell in Cornwall. He's been running a homeless charity for the last 15 years, helping homeless people. He got a letter last Friday from the Conservative-led council in Cornwall saying you have 5 working days to cut your costs by 40%. Otherwise, we will withdraw all funding from you. 40% in 5 days.
All right.
Even if you agree with the cuts, how can you do it in that time frame?
Francis Moore.
You're not building a big society, Francis. You're shrinking it.
The panel discusses Big Society, a UK initiative under former Prime Minister David Cameron encouraging citizen engagement in community-led solutions to social issues. Douglas Murray is spot on. The financial mess left by the past government is undeniable. Cuts are essential, not choices. The big society, a blurry concept, opposes reliance on the state for everything. So if you're ready to ditch the moral laziness and embrace the challenge of self-reliance, be sure to smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. It's time to toughen up and heed Murray's crystal clear message. The state isn't the answer. It's up to us to measure up to our own needs without being coddled.